Welcome to Reconnecting with Wholeness, the podcast where we dive deep into the messy, beautiful journey of coming home to yourself. I'm your host, Paige, and together we'll gently question everything, bringing you deeper into self-awareness, acceptance, and trust. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin. Hello, welcome back. So last week we talked about our nervous system, and I gave a bit of an overview regarding our central nervous system, what people are talking about when they talk about nervous system regulation, which usually we're talking about our autonomic nervous system. And we're talking about two particular things, right? Activating our parasympathetic nervous system, and typically we're talking about deactivating our sympathetic nervous system. Now, I don't mean deactivating in the sense of we're trying to turn it off completely, but the idea is that we're supposed to return to homeostasis, right? Where our sympathetic nervous system is here to get us out of danger, out of a threat, into safety via survival, right? So this part of us says, okay, here's a threat. We need to survive this, and so let's move you into safety. And once that safety happens, ideally, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. Now, a lot of times what happens for us as humans is that doesn't actually happen. We never have a full calm down. And this can happen for a couple of different reasons. It can happen because, one, we never allow ourselves to fully close that loop, and so we kind of get stuck. I would use this terminology of we never fully allow ourselves to feel the height of and the fullness of that moment. And as a result, it shuts down and it kind of stays dormant. And my dog barked and I totally lost my train of thought. The second part of that could be something that I guess I'll have to remember later. The second part of that is because we also kind of are humans, and I mean, not kind of, we are humans. And so we are more complex. In fact, I was just listening to gentlemen from the Center of Healing talk about trauma in the nervous system, and I really liked this analogy, so I'm going to use it. If you think about an animal, and if you think about this typical predator-prey standpoint situation, right? And they use the analogy, so I'm just going to roll with it. There is a gazelle eating some grass, and a lion comes up to it or tries to pounce. The gazelle runs away and they run for a good old time. Let's just say the gazelle ends up getting away. The lion calls it quits, and the gazelle has a come down moment, and the gazelle doesn't live the rest of its life thinking about, is there going to be another lion? They kind of come back to the present moment, and maybe they don't go back to that same spot to eat. Maybe they do. Who knows? But that, in an animal, right, that fight response, that stress response happens in the face of danger, and otherwise they're able to kind of come back and live their life, and they're cool, I'm going to eat some more grass again. Where we as humans really don't do that. We yes, we internalize it, but also we are going to probably spend the rest of our lives kind of looking over our shoulders to say, is this going to happen again? And ideally we can get to a point where we don't do that, but that's what a lot of us do for now, while we don't know how to process trauma all the way. So we're going to talk about the types of nervous system responses today. We're going to talk about kind of some of the differences, and I really want to go into this conversation again, just knowing that the nervous system responses, right, these sympathetic responses are for a purpose. So none of them are innately bad, right? The idea is to get us out of danger. And I talked about this, I believe, a little bit last week, the hard part now becomes danger to us now as like a civilized community. Never mind. Where we are living in houses and cities and suburbs and all of that is different than what it once was, right? We're not threatened now with lions and tigers. And so now mom and dad, or mom and mom, or whoever your parents are, become the threats that are potentially perceived. Now our teachers become the threats that are potentially perceived. Now our peers are the threats that are potentially perceived. And that plays a big role in how we live our life. The other thing that I really want to say on this too is that the nervous system responds to whatever it is that you perceive as a threat. This is an individual, I almost want to say process. I don't know what the right word is. But while, yes, we all have a nervous system, and yes, we all can experience these 4 nervous system responses, what you perceive as a threat, most likely based on any of your prior experiences, are going to determine when your nervous system activates into the sympathetic response. And so just because somebody else doesn't process that event the same way, doesn't negate or invalidate anything that you experience. So I just want to kind of say that off the gate. So, nervous system, types of responses. There are 4. Typically, what we know is fight or flight. Fight is pretty simple in my head, right? Like that's aggression, that's confrontation, that's, somebody who you're in a situation and the person who fights is kind of like the person who runs into that, right? We're going to try to attack the bear or kill the bear. You're going to run into, I don't know, my mind's drawing blanks. We can see this in a few different ways, right? We can see this in like actual physical fighting, but we also can see this in terms of like social media, the person who like gets really defensive in conversations that can maybe feel a little difficult, right? The person who like gets defensive and starts to yell, that's like a fight response. Then we are going to move into flight. So that is obviously escaping, that's avoidance. This can look like a few different things. One of the ways that I see this is more in terms of like busyness. This might not be like an exact trigger, but I see it a lot in like the emotional realm of somebody who doesn't feel comfortable to process their emotions. And so like they throw themselves into work, right? That's like in a form of escapism. That's in a form of avoidance. Of course, there's like the obvious running away of danger. So again, like it can be physical, but it also doesn't have to be. It can be a mental avoidance. We have fawning, and this one is probably one of my preferred ones to talk about because I think that it is very misunderstood. It's not talked about a lot. And this is sometimes mixed in with like a freeze response or a dorsal response, but really I see it as a sympathetic response, and it is to appease in order to create safety. So this looks more like people pleasing. It can look like codependency. It can look like over apologizing. It can look like peacemaking. So this really gets into some interesting conversations, because I think that there are so many different ways that we can see this. We can see this in the work environment. We can see this in relationships. But the idea is you see a threat, and rather than fighting it or running away from it, it turns into, how can I make this other person happy? And of course that is a survival response, right? Like people pleasing can very much be tied to our survival. And that's really what fawning is. It is that people pleasing for the purpose of survival, because I need this paycheck, or I need my parent to like me, or I need them to be happy with me in order to like keep me safe. And then we have our freeze response, right? This a lot of people know. And this is really like where we get flooded into overwhelm, or the system is activated, but we can't act. This can feel like panic attacks. It can feel like spiraling. This can feel like, I have more of a feeling of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start, right? Like, you know something needs to be done, but you don't know what it is. You certainly can't do it. That moves into kind of like that freeze response, that inaction. I have experienced this. I've seen other people experience this. My personal take on these 4 different responses is that we, at various times, can have all 4 of them. And I'm going to say at various times, because I personally have met people who tend to try to identify themselves as one or another, right? Like, oh, I'm a fighter. And what I see as more realistic is that in certain situations, somebody might fight. And then perhaps in other situations, they avoid. And then perhaps in other situations, they fawn. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because, I mean, ultimately the goal is for our nervous system, and especially this part of our nervous system, is like what gets us out of this situation and into safety. And that's going to be different depending on potentially how old you are. Are you at work? Are you at home? Are you with somebody who is bigger or stronger than you, right? Like, are you with somebody who's faster than you? Like, all of those things come into play. And even though it is kind of this like automatic thing that happens, I mean, really it is an automatic thing that happens. I do believe that our brain is a very smart place, and our nervous system and our body is very smart. And ultimately it is going to do whatever it thinks it has the greatest odds of getting you out of that situation and into survival. Where things get a little lost for us as people, and I talked about this a second ago when I was talking about like the gazelle and the lion, right? Is that the gazelle and the lion, that gazelle, like, it has its reaction and then it comes back to present moment, calm, all is well. Where we as humans don't do that. We have a hard time closing this loop completely. We have a hard time of fully processing whatever it is that happened to us. And I think that that's an important thing. I really think that it's important for us to experience the full spectrum of our nervous system response. And at the same time, I say that with a little bit of caution, because I think that this is something that is best done with the help of a professional. The 2 gentlemen that I was listening to talk about trauma and the nervous system from the Center of Healing, they had referenced a book called The Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine, I think was his name. And I mentioned that because I would say, before you ever think like, I'm gonna try to like process this whole spectrum of emotions, like read that book and see what he talks about. And then ideally, even when you think that you're ready to go through it, like have somebody there who can hold you through those emotions. They were talking about like, you know, the level of terror of what had happened to like the level of rage. And I recognize that we are humans and that oftentimes I guess I mean this in like two different ways, right? We are humans in the sense of the person who experiences that nervous system response and isn't able to, not even that you're not able to, but that hasn't ever completed a full nervous system peak and then back to homeostasis, is probably going to be scared throughout this, right? Like, I don't want to experience this level of rage because I've never experienced this level of rage and I don't know what's going to happen. And we as people tend to want to be in control. So there's that aspect. But then there's also the second aspect of the person who is holding space for you in that environment. Is that something that they're familiar with? Is that something that they're comfortable doing? And what does that look like? And so if that's where you feel called to move, I would say like do research to find like a professional that you think is best suited to help you do that. But really, for me, right, like my purpose in this podcast, and this includes this episode, is to reconnect you back to yourself. And that is not specific to reconnect you back to your trauma. I think it's important that we talk about it. I think that it's important that you know what it is that you see as a threat and what activates that sympathetic response. I think that in theory, it's great if at some point you work with somebody who either is a trauma-informed therapist or does somatic work or does energy work that's trauma-informed and can like hold that space for you. I also don't think that that has to be today or your next step. So for me, for the purpose of this podcast, right, my next step for you would be, can you identify when and where your nervous system goes into which states? So like last week, I left you with the question of, can you identify when your nervous system goes into that sympathetic response? Now we're even kind of digging it into a little bit deeper, where we're just saying, can you see where you fawn? Can you see where you fight? Can you see where you escape? Can you see where you freeze? And just starting there, just beginning to get familiar with your body and what it is that it's doing. And if you wanted to go a step further, say, okay, well, do I know why I do that, right? This is going to be an after, not like an in the moment, but when you have like a spiral or a freak out or whatever that is, right? Or when you get really defensive, can you see what that kind of initial threat was? And can you look at it enough to say, oh yeah, like I froze here because I felt like everything was really out of control and there was nothing that I felt like I could do, even though I could have done X, Y, and Z. Oh yeah, I fought here because I'm semi-comfortable with this person, or because I'm whatever. We're not here to like completely psychoanalyze what we're doing, but I do think it gives good insight when we can figure out what is that like trigger, what is that like initial set point, and also then kind of go into it to say, oh yeah, like I get really defensive and really passionate. And because the passion was there, this also made me get, maybe more heated. And simultaneously, sometimes we fight with the people who we love the most because they're some of the safest that we feel. And so that can also be true. Anyway, that's what I want to leave you with, is really just that end of leaning in to your body, to your nervous system. Can you tune in to what you, not just when your sympathetic nervous system comes up, but then also in addition to that, what your response is in any given situation, and allow it to kind of surprise you, allow it to be maybe sometimes it's a fawn response, and sometimes it's a fight response, and sometimes it's, I personally know that for me, there have been different times where I knew that I was in different responses, and phases of life, right, where from 0 to, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe, it was probably even longer than 8, but for the good portion of my childhood, my response was primarily to fawn. It was that appeasement, tell everybody what they wanted to hear, do what they wanted done. That'll be the best case scenario. And then as I moved into my teenage years, it was definitely more of a fight response. And now I'm realizing that in different situations, right, or with different people, it's different. And it's evolved over time. And so where maybe before I used to have a fight response, now I have less of a stress response altogether. Maybe now it's, I do some escaping. But I would say my 2 biggest ones have been that fight or fawn. And I definitely have gotten into some freeze responses. But in truth, I think that those they've always been there. I just am more aware of them now. I do recognize that I have certain things that I definitely move into an escapism mode for, an avoidance mode. And so that's really what we're looking at. We're not judging it. We're not trying to shift anything yet. We're just simply saying can you bring awareness? Because if you do want things to shift, it starts with awareness. And maybe you're hey, I move into this mode and I'm totally cool with it. And I would and that's cool too. I mean, at the end of the day, we're never going to get rid of these, right? That's not the goal. The goal here is not to have 0 sympathetic response. We still need it. We need it for survival. There are times where we are in danger. I would say my goal as just myself and my journey and my own humanness, right, is to have my sympathetic responses activate when I'm in actual danger, and not just because of some of my own developmental trauma. So yeah, it's just, unpacking that bit by bit. And with that, I will leave you. I hope you all have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks for joining me today on Reconnecting with Wholeness. I invite you to take what resonated and explore how it shows up in your own life. keep in mind, even the smallest shifts can spark transformation. If today's episode felt valuable for you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share it, leave a review, or connect with me on social media. Until next time, keep exploring, keep feeling, and keep reconnecting with the wholeness that's already within you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.